Welcome to Prime Your Midlife. I'm wondering if the four initials ADHD mean anything to you. And do you have the right knowledge to be able to work with or enable somebody with ADHD to have the best life possible? Well, today I've got Graham Summerscales here today, who is a coach on ADHD. Graham, welcome to the podcast today and our YouTube. How are you?
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me, Chris. I'm great today. Yeah, really, really good. Just had a round of golf, so I'm all smiles.
Very good. I'm curious, how does somebody with the ADHD tackle a golf course? Is it something that you have the same problems with me, as you can't get off the tee and it beats you up, or is it a different mechanic?
That's a skill set, Chris. That's a skill set, Chris.
Okay, I'm being a little bit.
That's just about grinding it out on the range, but it certainly helps with my my ADHD brain, anyway.
Well, we'll get into some other tactics that you've got, but let's just unpack this. So, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. When did you first discover that you were actually somebody with ADHD, Graham, first of all?
Like a lot of people now, the rise of the internet and social media in particular has had a massive bearing on people realizing they have got a potential diagnosis for ADHD. So I came across a YouTube video by a famous ADHD based in America, really high squeaky voice, called Jessica McCabe. And she did a TED talk called Failing at Normal. Failing at Normal was the catalyst for me to seek a diagnosis. So I watched this video. If anybody wants to watch it, I would encourage you to have a box of tissues at the side of you, because it's quite an emotional watch. So she described me to a T. She described every sort of symptom that I was experiencing, or what I thought I had. And it felt, quite confusing, but I needed clarity. And at 53 years of age, I wasn't willing to not find out. I needed to find out, because this was following a divorce. So I went to my local GP, had a telephone consultation, disclosed what I felt. She basically said, "I think you've got a good case for it. I'll refer you." Referred me to the psychotherapy unit within the NHS. Being as impatient as I am, which is an ADHD trait, I was basically nagging the living daylights out of her. When's this going to happen? When's this going to happen? When am I going to get this assessment? And through my own research, subsequently found out it was going to be up to 2 years. So I went and sought a private diagnosis, and I found this practitioner based in Hull, a lady called Sushi Dobinson, Dr. Sushi Dobinson, and she runs an organisation called Spectrum Diagnosis. Very, very proficient, very professional, very thorough, and highly, highly qualified, and really ethical. So went through that diagnosis process, and it's the only thing I've ever got 100% on in my life. and now I am at 53. Well, now I'm 55, so it's just virtually 2 years ago since I got my diagnosis. Nearly 55, realizing that this whole world of ADHD is open book for me.
And what did that open up for you in terms of realization or pathways from the past where you just thought, I can now connect the dots? What did that diagnosis mean for you in terms of just a change of life or a change of perception about who you are as a person?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. Getting a diagnosis for me was quite a bittersweet experience, and talking to other ADHDers, and we call them ADHDers in the community, And talking to the people in the community, that's a similar feeling for most people, because it's sort of what I call the inner world of not knowing. So you don't really know who you are, and that's not a great place to be, not knowing who you are at 53 years of age. So I almost felt sort of instant validation, but I was still quite confused in terms of, and I had this sort of feeling of, what if I'd have known earlier how things could have been so different? But that quickly shifted, because I'm a person that thinks with a glass half full perspective. I like to think forward. And memories, the past doesn't serve anything but two purposes: memories and to learn from, and that's it. So I quickly moved forward, and I worked with a coach quite quickly. So I went and paid for my own coaching, and I sort of started to unpick the sort of spider's web of not knowing, and finding out who was Graham and who was ADHD Graham.
And obviously the time that you got that diagnosis, when you were 53 and you watched the video, it's also perhaps correlating with, midlife, on this point that you're further through life than perhaps you've got left. Was there any part of your own inner feeling of, am I in a crisis or a mindset point of that, I'm curious about this? Or was it just that video that made you think, gosh, that is so me, I must be more curious about this?
Yeah, I mean, as I've mentioned, the real catalyst for it was a divorce. Now, it's not just one divorce I've had two. People like to say, people say that you just like cake, but that's not the case. I just needed to know what other people was seeing so wrong in me, I guess. And I guess that was it for me. It is just unpicking that, people not knowing who I was, and when I didn't even know who I was myself. So that was it for me.
I was doing some stats work to understand the significance of ADHD in the UK and also in the US and generally across the world. And I saw a couple of articles, particularly one provocatively from the BBC, about diagnostic testing and the correlation between that and also medication, and perhaps too many being diagnosed with ADHD. But it seems to be that the numbers are all increasing, in that it's gone from 4.7% in the UK to, I think, 6.5%. And I think the ADHD Foundation says it's actually 400% increase since 2020.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from? Is that better diagnosis? Is it more awareness from that TED Talk? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not just the awareness from TED Talks. I mean, you look at the digital world now, and every kid has got a computer in the hand every single minute of every day, and they're generating Instagram videos, TikTok videos. They're just generating this media, and they're talking about their diagnosis and their symptoms, and almost making fun of it, really. And this is generating a massive amount of awareness within the UK population, because way back when we was at school, anybody with ADHD wasn't even known about then, but it was called ADD then, which was just attention deficit disorder. So this was the kid in the class that were bouncing off all the walls, that couldn't focus for a minute, never completed anything, always needed extra tuition and extra coercive behavior towards him, towards him or her getting the ball over the line, if you like. And that's what was recognized when we was kids. But now it's been recognised that it is a real issue for people, at home and in the workplace.
And there seems to be quite a lot of generalization, particularly when you talk about children, in that they've had the cereal with too many E numbers, or they've had too much sugar this morning, which is sending them into this aspect of hyperactivity. From your knowledge of coaching people, is there a correlation between nutrition and the way that ADHD can then become more exacerbated than a normal situation with good nutrition?
I mean, it helps. I mean, nutrition helps with all sorts of different conditions, does it? You do this podcast, and I'm sure that you talk about these kind of issues with other sort of areas that you explore. So yeah, good nutrition always helps ADHD. Fish oils, oily fish for the brain, vegetables, good balanced diet. It all helps somebody with ADHD for sure. But it doesn't take the symptoms away. They're there forever. You're born with this. This is it's a neurological problem. It's a deficiency of dopamine in the brain. We just don't produce enough of it. So we've got to get it in creative ways. And fueling the body with the right foods is really important. Exercise is another great hit for ADHD.
Yeah, I'd love to get to some of your other tactics for coping. I'm just curious as well, though, as part of our discovery calls, you talked to me quite vividly about how it feels on a day-to-day basis and some of the implications of just things like your keys and having a good VA to enable you to get through the day in a good way. Could you just help the audience really come to terms with some of the things that you have to contend with on a daily basis of being somebody with ADHD, as to how difficult it is just to start and finish the day in a way that I might find just ridiculously simple?
Yeah. So I guess it'd be fair to say, Chris, that you've probably lost your keys once or twice. So I'm just looking at my keys now, which is in a great strategic place for me, which is fantastic. They're right in front of my nose. But I can lose my keys on a weekly basis 5-6 times quite easily. I can misplace things that I've purposely brought into the house from the car, daily basis. For example, one of the other things that I use this little story, I can start cleaning my bedroom in my apartment, and I'll notice that there's something in the bedroom that probably belongs in the bathroom, for example. So it could be some aftershave or whatever. I'll go to the bathroom, put the aftershave back, and then forgotten that I've started to clean the bed, and I'll start messing about cleaning the bathroom in some space. Then I'll probably find something that lives in another room, and then go to another room, and really forgotten where I started. And that's quite tiring. That is quite tiring, having to really double check, because you're sort of thinking, where did I start here? Where did I start? Because I've not finished. So, it's a common trait to start things and not finish things off. So it's really tiring.
And also tiring for people that I guess you have to have a personal and also a working relationship with, of coming to terms with the fact that there's nothing wrong with Graham's way of working. It's just that you've just got to understand that he might be into one task and then onto another. It's not that he's forgotten. It's just that that's the way Graham is.
Yeah. The ADHD brain loves structure. It lives in a very, very spontaneous way. There's a famous ADHDer called Ned Helliwell, Dr. Ned Helliwell, based in America, and he described the ADHD brain. His analogy was the ADHD brain is like a Ferrari with bicycle brakes. It just doesn't know where to sort of switch off. And I can lose thought track. Now, you just asked me a question, and I've gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and now I'm going to ask you to pull me back online and answer that question. Ask me that question again.
Yeah. In terms of the question I asked you about how it is living with Graham, who forgets things or starts one task and then needs to be reminded of the task.
Yeah. So I was saying the brain-like structure, wasn't I? Thank you. You've clicked me back online now. So the brain-like structure is very, very spontaneous. You can wander down rabbit holes, which is just what's happened. So like my profession, coaching, it's a very, very structured approach. I can't colour outside the lines. I allow my clients to be spontaneous because that's how they come out of themselves and tell me things that I can hopefully try and help them with. But the actual structure of the sessions is very sort of step by step. And we're very conceptual and big picture thinking. The ADHD brain is that, but it doesn't necessarily know how to put the stepping stones in place in how to get there. So referring back to golf is where we started. So look, my short-term working memory isn't too bad at times. So I'll go back to obviously talking about golf. Golf is a very structured activity. So it really does help me in my brain because it's shot by shot and it's hole by hole, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you can't get any more structured in a pastime as an activity. And I'm outside in the fresh air, which is another good thing for ADHD, outside in nature, connecting, being grounded, in a calming environment, other than the frustrating part of golf. But that's the skill set that's nothing to do with ADHD.
Yeah.
And there's some really, really successful ADHD golfers. So Bubba Watson, for one. So he's not done too bad, has he? 2 green jackets.
Well, absolutely. I wish I could be even a tenth of his ability. Yeah. I'm just going to take you quite a long way back. In our interview, you said the GP said, the phrase you used was, "You've definitely got a good case." That's a curious thing for a GP to say, almost as if it's a validation. Yeah. What did you feel when he said that? You've got a good case, Graham.
Well, I didn't think anything about it in the moment, and I guess this has sort of come about on reflection. But what I've and I thought, looking back, I'm thinking, you don't even know, and that is clearly the case, because general practitioners, and I don't want to diss general practitioners because they do a fantastic job, but they can't know everything about everything, if you know what I'm saying. They've got to be an expert in every single field to an extent, haven't they?
Yes.
And most general practitioners, they don't know enough about the condition.
Yeah.
So this is why when you go for an assessment, it's got to be a qualified psychotherapist that's obviously studying that area and that fully understands ADHD. And whoever's diagnosing you with medication, of which I choose not to in this case, has got to be, again, a qualified practitioner. Now, a GP is not qualified to administer drugs for ADHD.
No.
They can be too psychotic.
Yeah.
And to get the right medication for the individual, they've got to go through that qualified practitioner, psychotherapist, psychologist, to be able to get that medication right before they go back to the GP on what we call shared care.
Well, shared care, and also you talked to me about the principle of access to work. Can you tell us more about what that is and what that enables either individuals or workplaces to do as a result of the access to work scheme?
Yeah. So access to work is a scheme that was generated on the back of the Equality Act 2010. And this is anybody with a disability. So ADHD is classed as a disability. So it's a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. So anybody with that condition, and obviously they can prove they've got that condition, they are bound by law to, the individual isn't bound by law, but the workplace is bound by law to offer reasonable adjustment for that individual to fulfill their role at work. So access to work supports that in all sorts of wonderful ways. So when, as a self-employed coach, so I work for myself, but I'm also entitled to reasonable adjustment. So they give me a 28-inch 4K monitor. They give me a dictaphone for note-taking, because I struggle with note-taking and I struggle with managing multiple pieces of work. So the monitor helps me drag just one piece of work on there at once. They gave me some fancy software called Captioned, which basically transcribes conversations. So I don't have to note take and just send that straight to my client. They gave me a Remarkable 2, which is a digital notepad, which is a wonderful piece of kit. That's been a real game changer for me, because I can take bullet points in the moment and then email them directly to my clients, so they've got a written sort of process of what we've gone through in that session. And then they provided me with a VA of 9 hours a week, which is fantastic. And above all else, what the Access to Work scheme promotes for people with ADHD, coaching. So they will pay for coaching. So I can coach any ADHDer in the workplace for free. Now, the only criteria they've got to meet is that they earn £6,000 and they're in a job. And that's the only criteria that they need to meet. And they've got ADHD, of course.
Yeah. Now, you were already coaching your clients before your ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah.
What did the diagnosis do to your own individual purpose and calling as to who you now wanted to support, help, or coach? Did it make you think differently about why you were on this planet?
Yeah. It really did. I mean, I've been coaching since 2011. I was formally qualified since 2009, and I was formally qualified in 2011 with a qualification I did through the CIPD at level 7. That was really tough. That was a really tough gig. Now I understand why, because I'm ADHD. So first and foremost, I was an executive coach, and I've coached all around the world. I've coached in America. I've done recruitment work in Brazil, in Thailand. I've coached all over Europe. I used to fly in and out of Manchester Airport to Schiphol once a month to coach a Dutch guy. I've coached middle management right up to C-suite, from leadership management, team building, etc., etc. And then realizing that I'd got ADHD, I thought, I need to support people who have got this condition, because I know how difficult it is for me. So since then, I've just immersed myself in learning about ADHD, put myself on training courses, put myself on qualifications, ADHD coaching qualifications, with a wonderful organisation called Goldmine Neurodiversity. They're wonderful. And this is obviously realised that this is my calling to help people with this condition to thrive in the workplace, because there's no excuses not to be able to thrive in the workplace if you've got this condition. No excuses whatsoever.
Oh, it's fascinating. And how do you try to overcome any stigmatism or prejudicial behavior, or people that are just a bit skeptical to say, yeah, he's just another one of these ADHDers who's just on the bandwagon because it's the new fad to talk about on TikTok? What's your approach to that kind of ignorance?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because sometimes, you can talk to the wall, kite, and you're not going to get an answer back. But I try and influence that situation. Try and help people see that there's another side to their opinion. I go into organisations and do presentations. So, for example, tomorrow I'm doing a presentation to a charity called Tempus Novo. They support ex-offenders and get them back into work. based on your stats, which are rising, because it shows that my stats are out of date, actually, Chris. So you've got some. I need to talk to you about your stats. I've got a stat of 4% of the adult population have ADHD, but in a recent study that was carried out by the ADHD UK Foundation, we found out that one in 4 prisoners in the UK have ADHD. So that's massive, and given education in those kind of areas is obviously going to reduce criminal activity because of the impulsivity around around people's behaviours. So if we can get the word spread, and hopefully the skeptics will just sort of, their ears will prick up and they'll listen, because this is much bigger than I think that what the current stats are. My own feeling is that we could be looking at ADHD around 30%. But that's just my own opinion.
Well, it suggested when I was doing some background that in the US, 19% of middle-aged university students are ADHD. The other curious thing was that it seems to be 3-1 in favor of male to female. Where's that coming from? Any idea?
Do you know? I don't know. I don't know where that is. Now, all I know is within the community that I'm exposed to is that women are completely underdiagnosed, because symptoms in childhood for a little girl versus a little boy, they would probably, what somebody would maybe use the term of bit ditzy, if you like, whereas the little boy, so the little girl will probably daydream a little bit more, whether the little boy would be more outward behaviour, it'd be more sort of bouncing off all the walls and can't sit still, whereas the little girl would be more of a daydreamer. And this is where other diagnoses are coming to the fore, because what people are finding out is that their child in school has got ADHD and they're struggling with the schoolwork. And then they actually realise that a lot of their symptoms, the parents have got them as well, because it is a genetic disorder. So when I got my diagnosis, I soon realised that my dear mother, God rest her soul, that she had it undiagnosed all her life, and she really struggled with mental health, because this can get a real grip of people in terms of anxiety and depression. And there's a lot of people that struggle with the thought of suicide. And there's a lot of people that struggle with addiction as a consequence of trying to manage their ADHD symptoms.
Well, I always think it's funny that women always say that they can multitask and men can't. And there it is. The statistic is that there are 3 times as many more male diagnostics of ADHDers than there are women. So I'm applauding all the ladies out there. You are very good at multitasking. I was reading on your website, you've got some particularly good strategies to enable you to cope or become more comfortable with your ADHD symptoms. Can you explain more about those?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of study recently about the brain, and the brain's a really complex organ, isn't it? It's the real mechanics behind who we are and how we behave. So right in the set, I don't know if many of your audience have done any study on the brain, but there's a little part of the brain called the amygdala.
Yeah.
And the amygdala is responsible for that emotional response. It's what we call fight, flight, or freeze. Now, if we're in that fight, flight, or freeze situation, we are in panic. And whether you are neurodiverse or neurotypical, if you're in that panic state, you are not going to think right. You're not going to make the right decisions. Where we struggle as ADHD is we struggle with the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, where all the decision making is made, planning, organizing, etc., etc. That's what we really, really struggle with. That's where we need that dopamine injection to stay focused. If we can come to calm and center ourselves, this is where other techniques like meditation or mindfulness, cold water therapy, etc., bringing us to connection and making us more calm, we can make better decisions. We can operate and thrive, but we've got to get that sense of calm before we can do that. If not, I mean, I've realised through this training course, I think most of my life I've lived in the amygdala part of my brain.
Yeah. Well, I'm also understanding the amygdala has no timeline to it, on the basis that it can't remember whether or not it was last week, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. It just knows that the threat that is in front of it is a clear and present threat, and that is a fact.
Yeah. And it's very prehistoric in the way it's engineered, because, you know, go back to prehistoric days where the saber-toothed tiger is trying to attack the caveman. You know, it's a survival system that's in the brain. And it's obviously there for good purpose, but the world has moved on so quickly, and this is why you might see outbursts with people that just don't. They've not computed, they've not thought about things, they've not used their prefrontal cortex to make that decision and filter all that information, because the processing speed for an ADHD brain is much slower. It takes more time. We need step-by-step instruction. We need to work in short bursts to become more effective around completing tasks, for example.
Yeah. And the whole dopamine manufacture within the body, can it be replicated? I'm definitely not prescribing anything to do with drug use or psychedelics, but is it a case that an ADHDer simply cannot create that runner's high from endorphins, dopamine hit reward system, injecting a sugar sweet and having that dopamine high? Does it exist in no way, shape or form?
I mean, the coping strategies around getting dopamine is, we've mentioned a few already. So cold water therapy, you know, I think a lot of people know Wim Hof nowadays, and this ice baths and, you know, open water swimming, and I don't know, it's probably a great question to ask you, Chris, how you feel when you've been in open lake swimming and things like that. The body reacts to that coldness, and it brings a whole sensation of focus. And you know, if I have a freezing cold shower, and this time of year is not really beneficial because it's quite tepid as the water coming through your shower head. But certainly in the winter, you know when you've had a good cold shower, and I've got myself up to 10 minutes, and I just feel like my focus is just phenomenal. But I know that I've got to probably go to the gym at lunchtime just to get another kick. I can't just rely on that cold water shower early in the morning. I've got to do something else in the day to be able to get that kick, to maintain that focus. But get an ADHD on something that they like, and they'll hyper focus, and they'll work around the clock, and they'll forget to eat and drink.
I'm going to ask a really personal question here. Just as obviously you've had two significant relationship breakdowns. If you had that ADHD diagnosis, do you think that it would have enabled you to navigate your way through those relationships in a different way because your partner would have been more understanding?
Well, I'd have had the awareness to behave differently. Now, whether they choose to understand, that's a matter for them, isn't it? But I'm certain that if it had come about, it certainly could have made some kind of headway towards saving relationships. Yeah, for sure.
And if you were to move into a new relationship, would you be very transparent and upfront about your ADHD-ishness, or would it be something that you would allow to come out through a series of conversations as the relationship manifested itself?
Yeah, well, I am in a relationship now.
Okay, great.
She's fantastic. My partner's fantastic and completely embraced this condition. She works in an organisation now, and it's benefited her in the way that she manages her team, because she's got two people on her team that have got ADHD. So she's generated awareness through our relationship on how to navigate her style and navigate around the problems that her staff bring as a consequence of their ADHD as well, because it can present slightly differently in different people. So yeah, from a relationship point of view, yeah, it will be definitely a big tick in the box, and it has been. And she's you've got to have somebody who wants to understand, haven't you, in the first place? So it is about the individual as well. So she's very accommodating to my needs, but we still got to thrive. It shouldn't define us. It shouldn't be an excuse, and that's what coaching brings. Is that these coping mechanisms, so it doesn't define us, because there's a lot of mental trauma around ADHD, and understanding the mental side of it, but also generating the practical skills.
Yeah, you've used the word understanding there, and it's the habit from Stephen Covey is coming to mind, which is seek first to understand before you can be understood. And it's really bringing home to me here the way that we approach so many aspects of life with a predefined filter of what we believe, because that's how we see it. And often, I was only listening to a podcast recently, and it talked about a lady who was living on the street, but the day before, she was thinking about an end-of-life strategy. And from her, the fact that she'd moved from an end-of-life strategy to living on the street was a massive shift forward of her own coping mentality. But the person looking at her on the day just saw somebody that was down and out selling the big issue, and labeled her as somebody that was not achieving. But her own journey was, I have just shifted so far from where I was yesterday to today. That's a triumph. And yet, as individuals, we look at people with such a almost blind spots about what we feel, see, think, and take on because of our own internal perceptions.
We make an instant reaction, don't we?
We do.
We don't. I'm gonna refer to a quote that I love by Einstein, and I just think it sums up ADHD and difference to a T. And everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its own life believing it's stupid.
I like that. I've got Einstein over here, actually. He's behind me. Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow.
Yeah. And we do. We judge people on first glance, don't we? But until we actually spend time with that individual and try to get to know them, how can we make a real judgment?
Yeah. I'm conscious of your time. If you were to give us 3 working principles of either how you approach life or how you approach ADHD, what would they be, Graham, in terms of people to take away something that really meaningful about how they could look at people or situations differently?
Now then, you asked me this before, didn't you? And you got me thinking. For me, it's about growth mindset. It's about growth mindset. I had a really, really difficult childhood. I lost my father when I was 16. And that presented lots of challenges throughout my life. And I did have an option. And I suppose in the early days, I felt a bit of a victim. But I chose to then realize that I can make a difference. And I've always thought I can strive to be better. I wasn't very well educated. Didn't go to a very good school. But I always had a drive and a positive mindset. So growth mindset for me is one. Balance. I think too much of one thing is too much. So balance for me is really, really appropriate. And the love and appreciation of what life brings, whether that's a partner, what the world gives us to what other people gives us. But and ultimately, I suppose the fourth one is be kind.
Yeah.
Because I know from my own perspective with ADHD, this is a difficult thing for people to navigate with. But it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah. I love those 4 tips: growth mindset, be kind. Yeah, they're all very much speaking to my heart. And a lot of people, if anybody is listening to now, I would just ask you to just sit back and think about gratefulness, gratitude, and also just try to approach others with a little bit more empathy, of trying to unpick the layers behind the onion, and that there might be more to the person than you actually could even comprehend as to what that person has lived with. You know, your father, you talked about in your website that you had PTSD as a result of that. Have you gone into therapy, or have you done anything to try to come to terms with that feeling of grief or loss as part of your own discovery of yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could class it as midlife when I actually tried to address it, because it was quite a traumatic experience. My mum woke me up quite early in the morning. It was about 4:30 or 5 o'clock, something like that. And she was sort of saying that my dad was breathing funny. And I tried to resuscitate him at 16. And I lived with that for quite a long time. I saw that as failure. And I lived with that right up until I was 40 years of age.
Wow.
And I had counselling for that, which put it in a safe space. Never ever forget that day till the day I die. Never.
Yeah.
But it's in a safe space now. I can talk to it. I can talk to you about it. I can answer questions about it, and record this publicly. So,
Yeah.
And you know, if you had to rewind the years back to being 40 years of age, would I be able to share this? No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, it's that good old amygdala again. It's there to try to protect you from something that significantly hurt you, and it's its way of coping with that trauma. But actually, keeping that trauma within us is not conducive to a long-term good life, because that stress can create all kinds of other implications. And I heard a podcast last week about somebody that had really suffered significant trauma, and the interviewer said, do you not think that that's something that you should work with? And it was a flat refusal. And in fact, the podcast atmosphere changed significantly as a result of the question. I still think it was the right question, and I would ask you, why did it take 24 years?
Why did it take 24 years? I think we come from an era where it was a case of you've got to get on with it. I can remember the time when it was at my dad's funeral. We just lowered his coffin into the ground. It was the first burial funeral I'd ever been to, and it's the last one I've ever been to in terms of a burial. And my uncle come round, and 16, I'd just left school. I'd worked for my dad. He had his own business, and I'd worked for him for about 4 months. And I was starting an apprenticeship with him. I was going to college and one thing or another. And his coffin gets lowered into the ground. My uncle comes around and says, "You're the man of the house now. You're going to have to look after your mum and your sister." What a responsibility at 16, eh? In your formative years. What a responsibility.
Thanks, Uncle.
Yeah. So things have changed, haven't they? And awareness around mental health, and obviously now conditions such as autism and other spectrum disorders, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, etc. They're all becoming a little bit more noticeable because of the rise of social media, and rightly so, So why it took so long is because I don't think the support mechanisms were in place back then. You know, this was in the 1980s, a long time ago.
And what can somebody do? I'm going all over the place here, and I apologize for taking your brain in all different rabbit holes. But your own diagnosis was potentially 2 years from the GP saying you may have a case for it, and then actually getting the confirmation of that. And you were privileged enough to be able to take a private intervention route. What does somebody do that's stuck between, I think I have, but I can't get that confirmed?
Well, they can reach out to me and I can signpost them to the wonderful lady who did mine. She's very reasonable. She will diagnose you. She won't straight away send you down to a medicated route. She will probably encourage you to generate coping mechanisms around your condition, whether that be with a therapist or a coach. And you can go back to her then, and then she would signpost you to the proper professionals who will be able to administer drugs to make sure that the right drugs to manage your condition. Because, as I've said, it presents differently in different people, and I know some people that just cannot live without the drugs.
Yeah,
they've got to use them.
But what if they have no means to pay for that at all, Graham? And literally, they have no means to fund that private intervention. Is there a signposting organisation or another way that they can try to expedite the process?
The only help that I can do is signpost them to charitable organisations like the ADHD UK Foundation. Tony Lloyd does a wonderful job there, and there's also the ADHD UK charity. People can get lots of tips and help and advice on that. There's lots of sort of downloadable notebooks and videos and one thing and another on those sites. Really, really informative sites to be able to help people with the condition. Sadly, everything costs money, doesn't it?
Well, the stats are currently, I think, 2.6 million people in the UK, potentially as a subset of 6.5% of the population. That's the numbers that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's massive.
Yeah. And your website is all-about-change.co.uk. Is that right?
Yeah. And if you want to go to the specific page around ADHD, it's all-about-change, all-about-change/ADHD-coaching.
Okay.
And there's also a link to the access to work for application, and we can help you with that application if you want. I've got a wonderful VA who will take you through that process and be able to apply on your behalf. Obviously, the charge for that, or you can apply for it yourself on their website. Is that some people just can't navigate it, or I've worked with an organisation who just couldn't afford the time to be able to process the application for their member of staff, so I took it off their hands and did that application for them, because obviously I understand how the application process works.
Nice. I know you're very busy. What would be a dream outcome for you, and maybe in the next year to 2 years, to enable you to feel as though you are really serving the ADHD community? What would that look like?
Just continue what I'm doing now. I'm living my dream. I really am living my dream at the moment. I'm literally back to back. I'm sort of booking appointments in now for sort of 3 to 4 weeks time now, for new clients. But yeah, keep them coming, because I love working with people. I love making a difference. This is certainly my calling.
Well, I know how difficult it was to get this interview, and I really want to honor you for your time and also the amount of knowledge and thought process you put into this. So thank you, Graham, for that. I appreciate it.
No, it's been great. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me along. I hope that we've made a difference in some way.
Well, I'll put lots of links in the show notes in terms of the ADHD Foundation and others. Is there a final message that you'd love to leave people with to just make them a little bit thought-provoked about how they go into their day tomorrow?
Don't judge that fish on how it climbs a tree.
Beautiful way to finish. Graham Summerscales, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. This has been Prime Your Midlife. And remember, we've got one life. So love life, living life.